Anthony Darby.
Chuck Henn.
We are here with a special edition of our 2020 legislative update. I think one of our very first podcasts, or if nothing else,
It might have been the first podcast ever.
even the behind the scenes when we were practicing the podcast, we used to play with going through the legislative laws. Last year there was like 100 to choose from, so we had a lot of content to go through. It seems like the good folks in Annapolis are starting to get at least a little bit of cannabis fatigue, and we're happy that they have that fatigue. It's interesting because when you're in our position and you're in a brand new industry and your representatives, quite frankly, don't understand a lot about the specifics and the ins and outs of what you do every day. Even sometimes when a bill is meant to help or they think they're helping, it can have negative consequences. And then sometimes these bills that kind of seem like they're a no-brainer to most folks, because of the wonkiness and because of the specifics, when you try to put that and mix with 1,000 other bills and put it in front of someone, it doesn't always resonate. So we'll try to do a good job of just kind of going through one by one here with the 15 bills that are proposed in Maryland. We'll glance over a few that are kind of odd and I don't think have a lot of traction. Try to spend some more time on the ones that do have some traction. There's a specific hemp bill that I want to get into, and then we'll kind of talk about a few federal regulations and just how some of the changing of the landscape between the farm bill, I think, will create some more legislation. So starting off here, our good folks, shout out to Ashley Bagwell, who's our lobbyist of the Maryland Dispensary Association. They do a great job of keeping us abreast of what's going on. They sent us a snapshot. So we had this snapshot that was sent to us about 3 days ago. It's the most up-to-date from what we have out there with any bill that is containing cannabis. So, Chuck, any comments or anything?
No, I think and as I went through this list, there were a couple of these bills that were on the docket under last year's legislative process and are back on the docket again. So obviously there is some relevancy and some importance to them. And then there's also a couple new ones. So it's just interesting to see how that landscape kind of shifts from year to year. And like Darby said, I think last year there was just so many of them. I don't even remember how many there were at the end, but they just kept tacking them on. And I think there is that sense of fatigue from the legislators, which we kind of welcome, I think. Yeah, a little bit, catch our breaths a little bit. Let's work through some of the laws that were enacted and passed last year and look at the things that are really going to move the industry forward.
2018 was your first full year of operations, so 2019 is when everyone had all the suggestions on how they could fix everything.
Yeah.
And then now 2020, I think it's been a little bit of a more consistent landscape. I mean, and I think it makes sense. Every year you should see less and less bills potentially as the landscape becomes more and more consistent. So the first bill that was introduced that I saw, House Bill 73, the sponsor is Grammar. This is a firearm bill. It is the right to purchase, own, possess, and carry while being a medical cannabis patient. So this is something that touches base home with me, obviously, as both a patient and someone who has a HQL but is currently unable to purchase a firearm. I guess a couple things. So logistically, our patients are right now, they are forbid from possessing, owning, or carrying a firearm. But the logistics of that really make it so that purchasing a firearm is where they have the most challenges. Knock on wood, we have not seen any execution of someone going and trying to take someone's firearm because they are a medical cannabis patient. So, but the purchasing thing is where it really, in my mind, comes into play. And, as much as I would love to see this pass, I think there's a lot of, if we're looking for parity, then we should be looking at, there's nothing that stops someone from getting a prescription of Percocet or Xanax to buying a gun. If someone is using alcohol, it's tough for the discretion for them to know if someone's actually abusing alcohol or just utilizing alcohol or using alcohol, I should say. So for us, we would just like to see some parity to prescription drugs that would not be this overall blanket of prohibition on purchasing or owning a firearm. I guess the last thing I'll say about this, and I'll get your point, Chuck, is no matter what I hopes I have to see this bill pass. In this state of politics in Maryland, I can't see anything where you see a law that Maryland would create that would supersede or go above and beyond a federal law in the way of opening up and providing more access to purchasing of firearms. I think in Maryland, typically what you're going to see is more legislation against the prohibition of guns, more legislation of making it harder for folks to access guns. So I don't see a lot of hope of this bill of making it through.
Yeah, and I probably don't either. And even if something like this were to make it through, I mean, those background checks are federal background checks on firearms, if I'm not mistaken. So even if Maryland were to enact something like this, I'm not even sure what it would mean, you know.
Maybe best case is a court case that raises the question, right?
Until something's done like at the federal level. But I mean, personally, I think it's asinine that if you have your card, you can't purchase a firearm. I grew up in a family that hunted and was around guns the majority of my life. Like, I mean, responsible gun ownership is something that, you know, it's America, man. And just because something was illegal, and I mean, it's all because it's Schedule 1, right? If this was, if it wasn't a Scheduled 1 substance at the federal level, it wouldn't be an issue.
That's a great point.
So it's just more stuff that kind of flows downhill. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's a great point that it is 100% tied to Schedule 1, and oftentimes is noted as the verbiage states that you have to testify that you don't habitually use alcohol or drugs. Because cannabis is a Schedule 1 federally illegal drug, you would have to testify to that, which would disqualify you from the firearm. So if this was a Schedule 2 drug, you would no longer have to make that designation of being a drug user, and then would be able to purchase firearms. So a lot of the stuff we're getting into now, though, as we talk about it, it does show the maturation of how far we've come in terms of that we're getting into the legalese of these things now, and raising questions that are super important, and will constantly be at juxtaposition as long as there's a federally legal crime that is legal in now. The most recent article I think I saw was 40 states have some sort of legal program in place. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I think as we were looking through a lot of these different laws and regulations today, it reflects not only the political landscape in the cannabis industry, but just the political landscape in general in the country. When you're talking about, there's 2 different firearm bills that have been introduced. There's some plastics and packaging bills, equal rights, and stuff like that. So I think what we're seeing now is just trying to tie in kind of the expungement stuff we'll talk about, tie in these national political issues like into our industry and how they fit. And it's just tricky when when anything touches cannabis.
Yeah, that was my next one that I was going to discuss was House Bill 83, which is automatic expungement, possession of marijuana. Once again, I think in today's environment, to have states with legal programs right in your region, and then to have almost 40 states have a legal program in some way, shape, or form, to be disqualified from getting a job or to have your criminal background thrown at you in a point that would basically impair your momentum in life seems ridiculous to me. And I just don't see a path forward of full adult use legalization anytime soon. So this is something that I think could be really helpful for a lot of folks, is taking this kind of misdemeanor, nonviolent crime that likely with, no harm to anyone else. It's crazy to think of what we do today, that 5 years ago, you have an eighth on you and you're going to jail. You're getting a lawyer, you're spending thousands of dollars, and you may have lost the job of your dreams, or maybe to get into the school that you got into. I mean, we know.
If you want to get into the military, you want to be a police officer, anything like that. Yeah,
and it's interesting when I still hear how this is prosecuted and how it's still treated in other parts of the state, other parts of the country. It's like, I'm thankful to be in Maryland, and I also can't think of living anywhere else that didn't have a legal cannabis program at this point. Like, unfortunately for me, it's like it's a deal breaker at this point. I can't imagine going back. And I think of some of the cannabis pioneers. I say pioneers, maybe it's not a good word. Let's just say like people that have been in it for 5 or 10 years, in the Colorados and New Mexicos, like our buddy New Mexico Tim, like he uprooted everything from a completely legal state and then moves to Worcester County, Maryland, like in the middle of nowhere, where he has to like sneak around and it's got to just be like a real culture shock when you think of like the difference between how we live now and going back to how it used to be.
It's a prohibition.
Any thoughts on expungement?
No, I mean, I think that this is, and if any of these things have legs, I think that this expungement thing, you saw that, even the Trump administration made some pretty significant efforts towards some of these kind of lower level misdemeanor, no harm, non-violent crimes, which I think everybody is kind of in agreement on now. I mean, this is something that should just get done.
If that's a topic that interests you, Illinois has just rolled out a really cool platform, or a really interesting way of tackling that. They have a very robust program now in that state, and
recreational now as well, I think.
Yeah, so this was part of the recreation. Part of the recreation was full legal January 1st, criminal expungement, and then they did some decent things around making sure there was good representation of all folks in the ownership within the cannabis industry. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Of note, that is that House Bill 83 is by our good friend David Moon, who like sanctimoniously every year offers up full legalization of cannabis, laughing, knowing that it doesn't stand any legs. He got a working group last session, which was like a big
That's
win.
a huge step.
A big win for him. He's kind of a cool dude out of Montgomery County. He'll be speaking at the Spark event this month, coming up in February for sure. House Bill 209 and Senate Bill 313, the Plastics and Packaging Reduction Act. This bill actually, the language in this is prohibiting a store from distributing plastic carryout bags to a customer at the point of sale, requiring a store to charge and collect at least 10 cents for each durable carryout bag the store provides to a customer. Authorizing a store to retain all money collected under certain circumstances, providing certain penalties for certain violations of an act of under certain circumstances. Have I said certain enough? Establishing the single-use products work group, requiring the work group to study and make recommendations regarding, and it gets cut off, but I'm assuming single-use plastics.
Yeah.
The challenge here is a couple of things. One is, I'm very sensitive, as we just did an entire podcast on the waste in the program. We see there is a lot of waste, and a lot of the waste that's there that is plastic based is not able to be thrown in the general recycling. So I think there's some things that are challenging there in terms of identifying that there is a real problem with waste in our industry. I'm skeptical of an overreaching bill like this. I mean, when we look at our dispensary, we don't use plastic bags. We either use a logoed white paper bag. We have some patients that actually prefer to have a discrete bag. They just get a typical
brown paper bag.
Yeah, brown paper bag. What I've seen in Colorado, and sometimes I don't know if what I saw was a county ordinance or a state ordinance, but I could have swore it was a state ordinance. And that was there was a state issued bag that you could use at multiple dispensaries, and it actually required you to use the state issued bag when exiting and purchasing products from the dispensary. So to me, that seems like it would be one way of addressing this problem, but that would make a little bit more sense, because you could almost skin two cats at the same time. So one of the issues that we face right now is waste. That's obvious. The other issue that we face is law enforcement oftentimes has a lot of challenges in terms of understanding when they find product, if it's actually a legal product, if it's being possessed by the person in which it's supposed to, and whether or not it was legally obtained. And in Colorado, the way they have their system requiring you to keep your labels and the products in that one bag. So if you had a vape pen, you could certainly have it hooked up to a battery and ready to go, but you would need to have the label for that vape pen in the bag. To me, that seemed very sensible. I think that oftentimes it's important to understand that our patients have a lot of rights, but that sometimes they still have some responsibilities as well. And that by making these things easier for law enforcement and cleaning these things up, it makes it more beneficial for our patients that are following the law to be able to go about their day without any interactions that are unpleasant. So, this particular bill is not something that I think I'm super in favor of. However, I think we could, as an industry, come around supporting a better way of handling the waste that comes out of our dispensaries. And I think that we could also have some room for cleaning up in terms of how products are stored and carried that would give law enforcement a little bit of ease and help them in some of their issues during traffic stops and alike.
The only thing I'll have to say with that is I think that one is has been introduced across the entire General Assembly. By that, I guess I mean it's not just our industry; it's every single retail outlet in the state. I think so, like grocery stores. I think it's a elimination of the plastic bag in general.
Bags.
Yeah.
Now that's been done in Montgomery County.
So I think Montgomery County was the first county in Maryland to do it. I know DC. I'm almost positive in DC it's 10 cents for a carryout bag. I know they charge something in DC for bags. San Francisco, some of these more progressive cities, in the Northeast and out west have already done something like that. So I guess this is Maryland's attempt to kind of throw something at the packaging and solutions, and this is kind of almost the same model I think you'd see wherever else you would go.
California, right?
Yeah, California. And I know I'm almost DC? Positive when I was working in DC, you have to pay if you wanted a bag. It was like 10 cents extra.
I think
always positive.
So what do you think the likelihood of this passing is? If it's not cannabis, it's not just cannabis related, but affects the cannabis industry.
I don't know if it does that. I mean, they have a working group. So I always think that when they form these working groups and stuff, that there's some logistical issues that
like
need to
be 3 to 5 year plan.
Yeah, I don't even know if that much. Maybe, who knows? I bet you it has some legs. I mean, if you think about it in the context of today's political environment that that we're in, I mean, it hits on a lot of things that are in front and center of people's mind. So even if it passed on some type of amendments, I guess it wouldn't surprise me. I bet you I could get some inside scoop on some of that. We'll have to check our sources in Annapolis.
The next one is House Bill 331. Oh no, sorry, House Bill 259 and 103, health occupations, diagnostic evaluation and treatment of patients. Is this about disciplinary actions regarding health officials for testing positive for cannabis?
I think so. I'm not really sure. I don't really know a ton about this piece of legislation.
It is interesting that we have so many healthcare professionals that come to us and talk to us about like wanting to become a patient or are patients and are concerned because, there's someone in particular I know that has a very laborious job at the hospital. They're in the surgery department and their shoulders all tore up and to drink a beer and a Percocet is kind of applauded, but to ask about CBD, it's like, hey, what's up with all these questions? So I admittedly don't know the details of this bill, but I think what you're seeing is they're trying to, once again, they're trying to clarify some of these areas and create parity within medication and cannabis, and certainly sometimes even alcohol and cannabis. So, if a doctor goes on a 2-week vacation and on the first day used cannabis in Colorado on vacation and then comes back and is in surgery 3.5 weeks later and tests positive for cannabis, it's tough for me to think of an argument that cannabis played a role or in any way made him of not sound mind to be able to do that surgery.
Great.
This next bill is kind of cool. House Bill 331, Connor's Courage. I actually know Connor's father. Connor's father was my high school lacrosse coach my senior year. Nice. And Connor is out of Hartford County, Maryland. And he is a juvenile cannabis patient. He had a onslaught of stomach issues. And cannabis is really the thing that saved his life and gave him a quality life. And now he's doing kid things like racing midget cars and doing some cool things. But the challenge that he has right now is that, during the day when he's supposed to have his afternoon dose in school, he's unable to take it. And I don't know a ton about Connor's story, but I do know that he uses an oil sublingually. So the thought here is that, if my goodness gracious, second time this has happened. the school of thought here is if a child needs a medication to allow them to perform in school, and having gastrointestinal bouts is certainly not something that any child should have to endure, in school. We should be making it easier for these kids to access their medicine. And I think some of it's even just destigmatizing it. When someone reads this, I'm sure the first thing that some of the politicians thought was, well, we're going to let kids smoke weed in school. No, sir. No, we're not. Well, we are going to let them use a tablet or a sublingual tincture or an elixir or something else that will allow them to medicate discreetly and continue out their day of school. So this to me seems like something that is really, really needed. I don't see a Senate sponsor here. I don't know if that's just indicative of it being a newer bill or if it just hasn't gotten that far. But this is something that I would hope to be able to advocate for, and hope that folks would understand that this is a real need for, we know Riley out of Delaware, and Riley's law is Delaware's cannabis law was written in parts of her lobbying and her advocacy. And that was the next big step, is once she got it approved, the cannabis approved, then they went and got it approved in school, because Riley's mom was literally going there every day, picking her up, driving her off campus, giving her medication, driving her back campus. And that wasn't anything that was good for Riley to feel that isolation and being exposed to a different routine than everybody else. And it was really hard for Riley's mom to be able to pick up everything, go to school every single day, and provide her medicine when every other student just has it administered by the school nurse. So this is, to me, something that, is not necessarily a no-brainer, but it's something that's really needed. Any thoughts, John?
No, I mean, I agree, especially if we're speaking about things like sublingual tinctures or patches, or, some type of soft chew or something. Like, they have no smell. It's absolutely no different than going to the nurse and getting any other type of, medicine administered. So I'm glad to see that they're taking action on something like this.
I think something like this also is going to require some training, right? I mean, at some point in time, school nurses, they need to be exposed to this. It's a very
good point.
It's oftentimes... we get to see the true holistic approach of this, not in a medical sense, but just like how it affects everyone. And like, if they were to pass this bill, there's school nurses out there that are saying, well, wait up, I've never been given any education on this. I don't know what to do. Same thing with law enforcement oftentimes. I mean, we had a really thorough conversation with the state's attorney's office and Sheriff Lewis. They just hadn't had a lot of exposure to what we do. They haven't had a lot of exposure to our side of things and how we view the law. When we think of a cannabis law coming, we think about our patients, we think of a medicine being infringed upon, and they're still thinking about law enforcement. They're still thinking about criminal justice system. So it's always interesting to think about how these laws have trickle-down effects. So if you pass something like this, well, then how do you immediately make it so that the colleges that are training these folks are starting to bring upon education on cannabis, and how do you make sure the folks that are already in the ranks are getting the education? And just, there is a lot of heavy lifting that I think oftentimes is sometimes dismissed when we think, well, this should be as I almost called it, a no-brainer. Can we skip down a couple?
Yep.
All right, I'm going to skip down to Senate Bill 146. That is the income tax subtraction modification bill. If you've listened to any podcast, Chuck and I do, you've heard us talk about IRS 280E and our growing disdain for that. I was lucky enough to have the privilege to go to Annapolis last Wednesday and actually testify to the taxation committee on this particular bill. It was myself, it was Stephen, I believe Bishop, the CPA, and Hope from Marion, Maine, a dispensary in PG County. She's like, right. I think she's closer to the stadium than like, I think she's like fairly close to the DC line, but out there. And it was, I think it was good because the CPA, as CPAs did, brought charts and a PowerPoint and did a really good job of utilizing some statistics. And then just Hope and I were able to kind of just explain the differences that we face and paint like a real life picture of how we're taxed so much differently. And and how this, if this is a medicine, this is truly having a ripple effect down to the patients. Chuck, this bill was here last year. We thought it was going to pass last year. I'm going to argue that it didn't pass because of the fatigue, because they were just throwing at so much stuff. And this is something that when I talked to my senator, and we talked to Senator Ackhart, and we have discussions around this, it seems to be something that they, when they understand it, they're for. I'll tell you, the biggest thing that comes up, and if you have a chance, if this is something that you want to be vocal enough about to write your senator, just make sure they understand that it's not a tax credit.
Yeah.
It's often thought that we are somehow looking to get like a Solyndra style tax credit or some kind of government handout, and it's actually the opposite. We're just still treated. I always call it the John Gotti rule, but it's not John Gotti. It was Al Capone. And the racketeering charges and the income that he had generated from that racketeering, he did not pay taxes on. So that's kind of how this came to fruition. We're still treated like illegal drug dealers who have to pay taxes on everything other than cost of goods sold. This bill would treat us like a normal business within the state of Maryland, which is, the federal is still the larger piece, but every little bit helps. And I think if the federal government sees a wave of states, which I was surprised. I think there's already 7 states that have passed a bill similar to this.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That was one of the things that, we still learn new information. That was one of the things that surprised me, was the fact that there had already been several states to do this, and a lot more have proposed it within these sessions this spring. So I'm going to put this as the most optimistic bill that I have to get passed this year. Because it is, it's not overly partisan, it's not overly touchy, and I think that we did a better job of explaining it, and there's less cannabis fatigue. So I'm gonna feel good about this one, and think that Senator Young gets it done this year.
Yeah, and I mean, and for us, as a business, this would allow us to grow the business. I mean, instead of going out and growing the business, we have to pay taxes. We have to pay way more taxes than any other business, in the country has to pay. So if we were to have more money, instead of paying taxes with it, we could hire more people, invest in a better building, invest in new technologies for the patients.
And the areas that affects us the most are just that. It's our personnel, it's our people, it's community outreach and marketing are the areas that are affected the most in this kind of weird taxation structure that we're under. So although we've had small premise throughout the entire time, I can tell you that our hiring would have been accelerated at a much higher scale if we didn't have to have the tax burden and look at every single dollar that we spend in a salary almost is taxed as revenue. So it's wonky. I know that even after this and after listening to us, people still don't really necessarily grasp it. But it's something that is once again rescheduling the drug would change as well. Yeah. This is another implication or another impact of cannabis still being a federally scheduled one drug.
Can we hit on all the big ones?
All the big ones. I know that. Yeah. The other one that I saw that wasn't necessarily cannabis related, but is hemp related, is there is a House bill right now that was submitted by Baltimore County Delegate Shelley Heddleman that proposed legislation that prohibits hemp grows within 2 miles of a residence. Relatively speaking, I don't know of a Eastern Shore hemp grow that is not within 2 miles of a residence. And I know that, so I look at this 2 ways. One is I find this funny. But I also find it in line with what you typically see with, you have communities that are being built in agricultural areas. So that area that was once wide open farm, and the chicken farmer they chicken shit down and no one complained because they were 50 miles away. But now Shell Homes or whoever builder wants to take 10 acres of that and build, 25 houses, and they're brand new houses, and these people just bought brand new houses and they love their brand new houses, and all of a sudden the first spring comes and the smell of something, whether it's chicken, whether it's hemp, whether it's whatever, it's like, whoa, we forgot we lived in an agricultural community, right? Like, I think
No, I 100%, right? Like populations used to be concentrated in cities, right? And then they started building suburbs, and the suburbs all of a sudden sprawled out. Now, like you said, like you drive down the road, there's a housing development surrounded by farms. It's like these farms have been there for generations.
Yeah, and I get the hemp smells like cannabis, which is a whole thing of its own. And we had a local council member that was really upset that his house is by a hemp farm, and he finds the smell to be, really, really repulsive. So I guess I understand that hemp has a smell that is slightly stronger than other things, but I think it's just like, it's still just the tie to marijuana.
It is. No, I think if this was always legal, I don't think anybody would say that it smells bad. They'd be complaining about the sewage treatment plants, or they'd be complaining about the chicken manure, cow manure, or pig farms, or, something else. But just because people have this negative connotation in their head, automatically it's like, oh, that smells like horrible.
So my last thought was, the way to end this is with the 2018 Farm Bill bringing hemp to market, we're seeing a ton of regulation kind of coming at a national level on the back end of this. So I was talking to someone last week who was talking about the increase in states banning raw hemp, smokable hemp flower. And they're banning smokable hemp flower not because smokable hemp flower is bad for you. They're banning it because it's creating too many issues with law enforcement. For law enforcement to look at a quarter ounce of smokable hemp flower a quarter ounce of flour, there's zero possible way that you can tell what's above 0.3% THC and what's below 0.3 THC. And I think about what that looks like in terms of law enforcement and the creation of concern there, and then even just like our concentrated products and the evolution of those products that we have. We have a new product, Chuck, you may want to check out. It's called it's an aqua. It's basically aqua live res. So it's a live res process where they use water. The good friends at Calta. It looks like white powder. Like it looks. I don't want to call it the CRACK word,
but that's what it might look like.
But it certainly doesn't look like weed. That's for sure.
And you dab it just like you would a traditional concentrate.
Yeah, so if Sheriff Lewis comes to my house and sees me break out a blowtorch
and a whole thing full of white powder?
Yeah, to dab white powder, it could be confusing.
God.
And I just, you know what I mean? Like
And what are they calling it?
Just Aqua Live Res.
Interesting.
It's very terpy. He's taking notes. It's really fruity.
New products come across every day. Like to your point, like
but there's no way that law enforcement, like if I, heaven forbid, I had that in a plastic bag, I would argue that 0 out of 10 law enforcement officers get that it's cannabis. You say, what Schedule 1 drug is this? They're all going to go meth, or
cocaine,
or heroin,
crack,
or something. They're not going to assume that it's a cannabis product. So and anything that you can make with cannabis, we're seeing them make now with hemp, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So when the first hemp isolate, which we've seen
hemp isolate,
CBD isolate,
yep, all day long.
What does CBD isolate look like?
Same thing. Crack cocaine. Yep. No, it's exactly what it looks like.
So I'm picturing, and we have that product as well. So our good friends at Nature Heritage have a CBDA diamond product that looks like a white rock. That doesn't even get you high. It's not even intoxicating. It's CBDA.
It's CBDA.
But if an officer sees that, I mean, so I don't know if it's like mandated education, if it's just like if you end up seeing laws passed that stifle the hemp industry just because there's so much ambiguity. Like I think that the Farm Bill is going to create a lot more issues for law enforcement than anyone had ever thought about. Because when I think about the Farm Bill, it was all about the no-brainer of being able to grow medicine again. And I don't always think about the criminal justice side, or the side that, well, now people are going to be...
Like, when I think about it in that context, right? Like, it's essentially a brand new industry. It's been around since the beginning of time, right? Cannabis has, in all forms and varieties. But now it's really just started to become halfway commercialized. And it's not even legal to do banking with it. So, like, the real industry hasn't started yet. But you're trying to develop this new industry with all this technology. In this day and age, right, like, there was no structural backbone to any of this regulation before, and the industry and the technology of this day and age just completely outpassed legislation and regulation. And since it's been illegal for so long, the disparity is just, like, huge. I don't know how they're ever going to catch up
it's tough
to industry and technology.
And there's not a large desire in a lot of these different industries to catch up. They almost are just like, maybe this will go away.
Yeah,
we talked to a pharmacy about CBD one time, and they literally like, well, I'm not sure this is going to stick around. I'm like, this is going to be around longer than you're going to be in that pharmacy job, homie. So, you're right, though. I mean, and we haven't even seen what happens when Johnson & Johnson or Procter & Gamble get a hold of this.
I mean, some of those, you've seen a little bit of that multinational kind of partnerships, but it's all been done really through the hemp and CBD space. You see a lot of CBD infused, whatever you want to say now, right?
The pillows and the Bed Bath & Beyond.
I mean, you got Gronk on national TV talking about it. Every MMA athlete has a different CBD sponsorship now. It's in a lot of professional sports. That's like, that is the tiniest little penetration, like, into mainstream culture, and it's just begun. So I can't imagine how the regulators, and it's just deschedule it, just freaking deschedule it.
Yeah,
just like
we say that, and then draft ball CBD comes out, and we're like, oh, maybe a little schedule, just a little schedule. We can just. Anything else? I think it makes the most sense to keep it focused on the state level. I mean, the national stuff is still so wide moving, and quite frankly, we need to get closer to the election before we actually know exactly what the signs look like. Although I guess I'll be surprised at some of the most recent rhetoric that I've heard. I mean, Bloomberg came out pretty hard against cannabis, saying it was the biggest, medical cannabis is like the biggest.
Michael Bloomberg did?
Yeah. Let me see if I can find a quote. It was like medical cannabis was the biggest spoof in American history or something.
Sure that wasn't Michael Bloomberg.
Let me see. I don't know. I did see that quote from Michael Bloomberg though, because it was a layout of quotes from all the Democratic candidates, and a lot of them haven't had very strong things to say. And somehow, who knows when you see these quotes stolen from a secret meeting? But apparently, like in a secret meeting, Trump said that medical cannabis or cannabis in general lowers your IQ points or something like that. I mean. To me, when I hear that stuff,
Washington rhetoric,
it shows me no insight at all to what's going to happen with policy. Like, I think the people that try to read the tea leaves off that versus instead of looking at who's got the benefit from what, I think that's an easier way of figuring out who and when is going to bring.
It's election year. Like, I mean.
It's gonna be used as a carrot.
Yeah, as somewhere.
Someone has got a strategy on how they can use it as a carrot, and that's my. I think.
I got my own. Yeah.
So we'll see.
Use it.
All right, Anthony Darby.
Chuck Henn.
We'll be back with a guest next one. This was a little special edition. Tune in if you haven't seen some of the previous podcasts. Please check them out. We got a library now, almost 23. So a full arsenal back there.
A lot of interesting, good topics.
Awesome. See ya.